So welcome to this webinar on Wellbeing Economy, a pathway to sustainable well-being for people and the planet. This webinar is part of this joint action on Prevent NCD, and one of the work packets on policies, and one task is on Wellbeing Economy. And we have been collaborating both with the WECO and the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. So we have speakers from both Wellbeing Economy Governments and the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. And the moderator today is from the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, Michael Weatherhead. I will now pass the microphone over to you. Thank you for being with us.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Dora. And welcome to everyone who is joining us online. Firstly, I really want to say what a wonderful lineup of presenters we have today. So you're really lucky and you really made the right choice to come to the webinar today, including policy advisors, we have government officials, we have academics. But all are here with a clear mandate to make this concept of a wellbeing economy practical, a concept that is genuinely different, a different way to structure the economy ultimately being about the way that we care and we provide for each other. So as we say at the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, or WEAL for short, our vision of a wellbeing economy is bold, it's vital, but it's also entirely achievable. But at WEAL, we also say that critical to bringing about such an economy is togetherness over agreement. We must embrace plurality in the pursuit of social justice on a healthy planet. So what I like so much about the range of speakers we have today is that they cover all of the ways that WEAL looks to bring about change. We'll be kicking off with Amanda, my colleague, helping to tell new stories about the purpose of the economy and its role relative to society and nature. Gary, the Chief Economist of the Scottish Government, and whose office hosts the Secretariat for the Wellbeing Economy Governments Partnership, one of the many new power bases forming around the world to transform the enabling conditions for such an economy to thrive, will go next. Then we've got Eloi, an academic drawing together the knowledge, the ideas, the policies, the practices to support these new power bases of decision makers. And then we'll have Dora, who through her tireless efforts of herself and her team within the Icelandic government are bringing this growing movement together in person each year at the Wellbeing Economy Forum in Iceland, the next version of which will be in May 8th and 9th in Reykjavik. Now, of course, all presenters are wonderfully rounded people that are powerful, knowledgeable, collaborative storytellers, but my point is that only really by bringing our different strengths together will we have a chance to change the debate and build momentum for economic transformation so that economies around the world deliver shared well-being for people and planet. So that's enough from me because you're here today to listen to the presenters. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Amanda Janu, who is the Economics and Policy Lead and my good friend and colleague at the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. So Amanda, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. As Michael mentioned, I work for the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, and as you can probably tell from my horrible accent, I'm actually from the United States. But prior to joining WEAL, I worked for nearly 15 years across Asia, Africa, Europe, working as an economic policy expert for the United Nations and other development agencies. And I remember in 2018, I was in my beautiful house in Thailand, really living my best life. And I was listening to this Graham Nash song that said, "So you're where you want to be, but not where you belong." And I thought, well, shoot, I guess I better go back home and try to help with this situation. And so I moved back to the US, knowing that life would be harder and that I would probably die younger. Because although we're the richest country in the world in terms of GDP, we are definitely not a healthy society. The level of anxiety and depression here feels crushing at times. But really the hardest part is because we have such an individualistic culture, everybody feels like it's their fault. That if they just eat better or work harder or exercise more, that they'll find the happiness that eludes them. Everyone's so hard on themselves, so therefore they're hard on each other, never feeling like they are enough or they can never have enough. People are lonely and tired because of extreme time poverty, with most people I know working multiple jobs just to get by, while even those with material abundance fall victim to this hustle culture that makes us feel like we need to brag about being busy. Our water and air and land is filled with chemicals and pollutants, and the food we eat is highly processed or increasingly lacks nutrients. And this is nothing to say of the particularities of the American sort of system around the absurd sort of for-profit medical system or the gun violence. So honestly, I would be happy if I make it to 70. But the point here is that all of these negative factors for my health are actually good for economic growth. Being a competitive, lonely, materialistic workaholic is good for growth, as this was the revolutionary insight of classical economists, that it's through our selfish instincts that we're able to generate the profits that can be reinvested into the expansion of production. And although the US may be particularly extreme in this regard, since World War II, and particularly since the 1980s, all countries around the world have been evaluating not only their economies, but their society's success by their level of economic growth. And this is because we believed that more goods and services was what mattered most for a good life. So with economic growth as our North Star, we went about encouraging and rewarding the large investors and corporations that were viewed as most efficient at using people and nature to generate profits and expand production. Because we believed, that more is going to ultimately matter most for a good life. And because the indicator that we use to measure economic growth, GDP, is a proxy for national income. And so we felt like if we could grow the national income, then hopefully this wealth would ultimately trickle back down in the form of employment generation, cheaper goods, and a rising tides for all boats. Now, I should say that honestly, if our goal is economic growth, we are doing an incredible job. We've seen an exponential rise in GDP per capita worldwide since the 1960s. We have designed economies that are great at generating growth, but unfortunately, they're also great at generating extreme inequalities, destroying our planet, and creating miserable people to boot. As according to the WHO, depression is now the leading cause of disability worldwide. And around the world, we're beginning to see governments acknowledging this fact, like Jacinda Ardern, who's one of the founding members of the Wellbeing Economy Governments Partnership, which I think you'll hear a lot more about from Gary and Dora, as Scotland and Iceland were founding members as well. But she says that economic growth accompanied by worsening social outcomes is not success, it's failure. And turning things around is going to require changing the way we think, the way we act, and the way we measure success. The reason why some governments are beginning to acknowledge this is because people are calling for change. The majority of people now worldwide believe that capitalism is doing more harm than good and see democracy as being eroded. So they're losing trust in government's capacity to effectively respond to the crises of our time because they see government as working in the interest of a small group of economic elites. But what's more, they don't just see the issue, they also see the solution, with 68% of people in G20 countries believing that the economy should work in a way that prioritizes the health and well-being of people and nature rather than profits and wealth. And this is fundamentally the call to action of the Wellbeing Economy movement. It comes under a lot of different banners like solidarity economy, regenerative economy, donut economics, post-growth, degrowth, and many more. But at its heart is this recognition that we have to stop treating people and planet like they're here to serve the economy and start treating the economy like it's here to serve us. Because ultimately, the economy is just a word for the way we produce and provide for one another. It's a means and method by which we interact with one another in our natural environment to improve our collective quality of life. And so it's not something out there abstract beyond our control. It's just one aspect of our society embedded within a larger ecosystem. And thus, its success should always be evaluated by its contribution to our society and our ecological well-being. As intuitive as this may seem, it's no small shift, as we've evaluated the economy, held it as above all else for so long, that we so often feel the need to make the case, for example, of why health is good for the economy, rather than feeling like we can swap that burden of proof and evaluate the economy in terms of its contribution to our health. We've become so accustomed and patterned to feel like we have to make the economic case, arguing that people's health and investment in people's health is important because it increases productivity and thus contributes to economic growth. But when we flip this script and really ask ourselves, how is the economy contributing to our health? It opens up a much wider range of considerations and factors by which we'd want to assess our economy's performance in terms of its contribution to our time, our connection, and the quality of our environment, for example. And so this is really the core of the Wellbeing Economy vision. It's about empowering all of you in the passionate work that you do as healthcare professionals or policymakers, environmentalists, or change makers in any realm, to recognize that the economy is not something given, that we have the capacity to redesign it so that it supports the well-being and flourishing of all life. There are many different well-being economy frameworks, which I'm sure you'll hear much more about from other speakers as well. But at least at We All, or the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, we talk about the 5 We All needs, which were co-created with our membership. And these We All needs really speak to, what do we need our economy to deliver for us? How can we truly reevaluate its success in terms of its contribution to dignity, connection, fairness, nature, and participation? And so the first principle of a well-being economy is really about evaluating the economy in terms of its capacity to ensure that everyone has the necessary foundations to live a life of dignity and purpose. In many ways, we actually produce far more than enough. And yet, in many countries, people are still struggling just to get by. And as healthcare professionals, you'll know the devastating physical and mental impacts of economic insecurity. But the issue is that right now, fiscal policy, for example, and the management of the economy, the goals are economic growth and employment generation. And so we don't ultimately focus first and foremost on evaluating our economy in terms of ensuring that it is providing all people with the things that they really need in terms of quality food, housing, medical care, etc., and then working to encourage and reward the types of economic activities and work that is truly most critical to our well-being. I was with some students recently, and they were reflecting on the fact that in our current economy, there seems to be an inverse relationship between how much you earn and how much you contribute to this world, with the most exploitive and extractive activities garnering billions, while the type of work that holds our life together and our world is ultimately paid little or nothing at all. This is not inevitable, but a product of design. And so we have the capacity to redesign our economies so that we're genuinely valuing economic activities by their contribution to the things that matter most. The second core principle of a well-being economy is that it ensures a restored and safe natural world for all of us. I was on a panel a couple years ago for a European health forum, and there was this woman from a Finnish community who had taken an integrated health philosophy to her community's development, and it started to put hospitals near forests to look at the healing capacity of having patients spending times in nature as part of their healing. And they found incredible healing power of trees, but particularly of old growth forests. And so she was there as a public health expert to actually advocate for environmental conservation and preservation. And we're learning in the same way that the way that the sound of birds stimulates within plant cellular structures the growth capacity, it also has profound impacts on our bodies and our cellular structures as well. We are all of this earth, and therefore whatever damage we cause to it, we are equally causing to ourselves. And so I've always struggled with this narrative in many environmental circles that humanity is a cancer on this planet, as I believe that if we directed humanity's creativity and efforts in the way that we have towards economic growth, towards rewilding, conservation, and regenerative economic activities, we could heal this earth so quickly and build a genuine circular and regenerative economic system. The third principle of a well-being economy is centered in this fundamental need for fairness. The question of whether our economy is ensuring a just distribution of income, wealth, power, and time. Inequality is not only ethically unacceptable, the levels that we've achieved now, but it's also politically unsustainable. I'm not sure if anybody's read any of Wilkinson and Pickett's books, The Spirit Level or The Inner Level, but I highly recommend them as they are epidemiologists that really look at the correlation between inequality and its negative impacts on human health and our mental well-being. The issue is that currently most governments, and even I would say the ones, if anybody's here from Scandinavian countries, you've achieved much more dignity and maybe equality, but it's still wrapped up in this need to grow the economy as quickly as possible so you can take some of that wealth to fix the damages done in the process. But what we need to do now is to move upstream and to genuinely build an economy which is equitable by design, by supporting cooperatives, employee-owned businesses, community land trusts, and the commons, ways in which we can all collectively benefit and ensure more equitable distribution first time around. And then the fourth principle is really about the goal of building an economy that supports belonging and trust. And so the question is, does our economy support meaningful connections and right relationships between people and nature? As I think it's important to be clear that the economy is always going to be a system of social connection. It connects and binds us through intricate networks of production and exchange. But around the world, we're starting to see increasing epidemics of loneliness. And there are different dynamics at play here driving this isolation. But as I mentioned, one of the fundamental beliefs animating our current economic system is this idea that everyone taking as much as they can for themselves will somehow leave us better off. But what we're finding from neurological research is that we're actually really hardwired to want to give and share. As the action of giving without expectation reduces our stress levels, boosts our immune systems, and reinforces social trust, while the seemingly benign action of a market transaction actually does the opposite. It increases our stress levels, suppresses our immune systems, and reinforces social distrust. So when we think of the economy, we tend to only think of monetary transactions. But the care or the core economy, the way we provide for one another as families, friends, neighbors, and communities, out of a motivation of generosity and compassion, is so critical to our well-being and our social cohesion. And so I think a major challenge of our time will be to figure out how to re-empower these non-monetary methods of provision and exchange and to remove them from these market forces. And last, but certainly not least, is the principle of participation. And the question of whether or not our economies are really locally rooted and influenced by our active voice and participation. As I think that one of the most critical issues with the contemporary form of corporate globalization is that people feel like they don't have a voice. They don't have power over their fate, their livelihoods, or a collective destiny. And this is feeding a lot of the shift towards more authoritarian nationalism and the desire for more protectionist and inward-oriented policymaking. But the point is that ultimately, if the economy is the way that we produce and provide for one another, it's always going to be influenced by our history, our geography, our cultures, our policies, and more. And so there is no one-size-fits-all solution, but we need to empower people through citizens' assemblies, deliberative democracy, and really meaningful transformation around governance systems to feel like they can proactively shape and form and influence the direction of the economy in line with their values and their goals. And so all of which is to say that how we get here, the process we use to get to the future is the future we're going to get. In economics, we're so used to these top-down, universal, one-size-fits-all kind of thinking. But what we need to do is a much more bottom-up, interconnected, and experimental approach to transformation. And whether or not We will ultimately can point to anywhere at this moment and say that's a well-being economy. It's an aspiration. This aspiration is spreading worldwide. We're seeing it international development agencies, cities, global organizations, countries, and media increasingly embracing this vision of a well-being economy. And so you're in very good company as you consider potentially joining this movement as well. But if there's anything I can leave you with, it would be to remind you that we are the economy. We have the power to mold and direct it, to redesign it. And I believe that once we realize we are the economy, then we realize we can change it. And when we change it, we might just change the world. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Amanda. Thank you for sharing that stories, if you like, of how an economy could be. And it is really quite a radical reimagination of an economy. And whilst it seems like an incredibly heavy lift, it's so incredibly important, because I think often of the current economic system and the way that we are continuing our pursuit of growth without really thinking about the growth in terms of for whom, why, for what purpose. And I often think of it in terms of a child's running race. Maybe think back to when you were a child at school, or if you have a child and you were recently at a school sports day, you know, they have maybe that 100-meter race, and there's that finish line, the string across the end of the line. And they've started running that race, and that race is hopefully reducing a race to reduce inequality or to get to net zero. And yet, really, with the current system, those two parents that are holding the finish line are actually running away from the children so that they will never get there. So we're actually making it more difficult to achieve the stated goals because of the North Star that we have. Thank you again, Amanda. So I'm going to pass now across to Gary Gillespie, who's the Chief Economist of the Scottish Government and also hosts the Wellbeing Economy Government's Partnership Secretariat. So a key grouping of governments who are looking to try and change the enabling conditions for us to more effectively achieve these types of goals. So Gary, it's over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael. It's a pleasure to join you all today. Lovely to hear Amanda speak as always. Great presentation. Thanks, Amanda. So what I'm going to do in just the kind of 10 minutes or so is give a wellbeing economy perspective, particularly from a government viewpoint, and how that has been operationalised within government. I'll say a little bit about why the concept of wellbeing, touching on some of the points that Amanda has made, and a little bit about the how governments are using kind of wellbeing economy framing in terms of how they look at policy through a system-wide approach, which is really a key requirement to do this. I thought the points Michael made about plurality were really important, and I'll just kind of convey a little bit of that in my sentiments also around that there's no single approach, and actually you can, where you start from this can be from different perspectives, but the key thing is that you recognise that kind of interdependence of the economic, social, environmental and the means of the economy in a way that the economy is designed to support people and planet, not the other way around. And essentially, I'll maybe share some reflections at the end of that. So I think, as Amanda said really well, the imperative has never been stronger for why we need a different approach, whether it's kind of climate, net zero, nature, biodiversity loss, or the increasingly entrenched inequality that we've seen as a major feature of advanced economies over the last 20 to 30 years. We've obviously just come through a major pandemic. We're still at the ends of a kind of cost of living shock, which again impacted people's incomes and well-beings. And we're really trying to think about different outcomes from the economy in terms of how it provides kind of broader outcomes in that type of focus. So very much that's the space that we're operating in. I should have probably said a little bit about myself at the beginning. As Michael said, I'm the Chief Economic Advisor within the Scottish Government. I've been in this role now since 2011. and I'll reflect a little bit on the approach in Scotland over that period in my remarks also. So I just wanted to say something about definitions and different approaches. We often get challenged quite a bit about, well, what do you mean by wellbeing economy? What is it? Is it different from other terms? So I've put just some different kind of quotes on the screen. I think for me, really, what's important is that this whole system is about the economy as a means to an end. And that's the key thing we need to think about rather than the other way around. There's a wee old definition, social justice and a healthy planet. There's a Scottish Government vision from one of our environment strategies from a couple of years ago. And the bottom left definition is from the work that the OECD helped the government of Finland do around the economy of wellbeing when they had the presidency of the EU and were introducing this concept. So I think Michael touched on at the beginning, I think that kind of plurality of views. Often people talk about kind of beyond GDP, green growth, donut economics, mission economy. So all of that is obviously all interconnected, but actually the key thing I think for me is thinking about a system perspective and what is it we're trying to enhance, and that's the well-being of kind of people and planet, and how you describe that process is relatively it doesn't really matter that much. I mean, enhancing well-being has been a kind of role of government for a long time. I often quote Adam Smith, the Scottish philosopher from the 17th and 18th century, often viewed as a kind of modern father figure for economics. And he's quoted for loads of the different things that he did. The notion of the invisible hand, the market, some of his work on tax, welfare, and other things. But one of my favourite quotes is in his theory of moral sentiments, where he said basically he believed that the success of government should be viewed in direct proportion to the extent to which they improve the happiness and well-being of their citizens. So there's even a recognition back then about the kind of role of government in enhancing well-being. But let me just come on to a little bit and say a little bit about actually how most governments kind of operationalise well-being, if you like. So this is Scotland's National Performance Framework. We've had it in place since 2007. It's a framework with 11 outcomes, a central purpose around well-being, and it also describes the type of society that we want to be, where people want to be treated with dignity and respect, and accept the rule of law. Now, most governments across the OECD, I think more than 2/3 of countries have multidimensional frameworks. So the beyond GDP thing is happening. Countries are looking at their performance across a wider set of metrics, and that's really important in that regard. Our own First Minister often says that there's no one department in government that can solve the crises or the problems that we face. So it's got to be a system-wide perspective. We've got to kind of challenge silo thinking and look at it in a kind of interdisciplinary type manner. So that's our national performance framework. It's currently being updated. It's a statutory basis within Scotland, and we're looking at the additional outcomes, additional measures, including care, which has been touched on, and it's something that is valued. So all governments tend to have an operating framework. At the recent OECD conference, there was a discussion of that, but how you move beyond that to think about policies and sharing how you actually get there. So I'm going to quicken up. Also, I should have said, this is often described as the operating framework for Scotland for our links to the UN SDGs. So this is the Wellbeing Economy Government's initiative, was started in 2018. Scotland, Iceland and New Zealand now has both Finland and Wales as full members, and Canada operating as well. And essentially we come together to share what's happening within the governments, the policies, the approaches, the the operating framework. Some of it's technical, some of it's policy, some of it's measurement, and to give that kind of safe space environment for government officials to work closely. On this slide, there's the top right panel is from the Iceland Wellbeing Forum from 2023, an excellent forum, and the bottom picture is a meeting of officials and academics, including the OECD in Glasgow a couple of years ago. So we come together both physically, virtually, to share policies. And this is a report the World Health Organization did, looking at the approach in each of these countries. Before the WHO started their work on wellbeing economy, they were interested in what was going on. And essentially they looked at Scotland, Iceland, Finland, and Wales, did a quick deep dive. And essentially what the key conclusion was essentially that they all shared a similar goal, but how they did it was different. And again, that reflects the view, I think, that governments will set their own context, will respond to their own wellbeing issues within that particular context, and that's really, really important. So if I was to give a flavour, Wales obviously have legislation, Future Generations Act, been in place for 10 years, really drives their long-term thinking. Within Scotland, I've already mentioned the National Performance Framework. We've got a range of different policies across that regard. Iceland, we'll hear from Dora, but really entrenched in the work around gender. Their leadership in this space has been excellent. Finland come at it very much from the economy of wellbeing, looking at it from health outwards, and are really forward thinking and thinking about how you can operationalise it within governments in terms of governance frameworks. New Zealand have been pioneering a lot of the work previously on the wellbeing budgets and how you kind of draw this into a kind of decision-making process. And obviously, Canada have just developed a whole quality of life measurement framework. So different perspectives, different views, and that's really, really important. I've got 2 more slides, so I'll keep going at a relatively quick pace. So we come together, we share policies and what's going on in our own jurisdictions, but what we tend to find is we're dealing with very much the same issues. We're dealing with things like climate loss, net zero transition. We're dealing with kind of child poverty. We're dealing with health inequalities. We're dealing with issues that, though the context in countries is different, actually the issue is the same. And if you're interested, the annual engagement report that's on that slide was published just at the beginning of November. The link's there to it, and that gives a description of what we essentially covered in the last year through our network and engagement. Given that the focus on this is health, wellbeing, economy, I want to also just mention that obviously the importance of other factors in driving health outcomes. We do some work with the World Health Organization. I was looking at their European Health Equity Status Report recently, which compares the health outcomes across EU countries. And actually, in terms of the difference in mental health and life satisfaction, more than half of the gap was explained by income security and living conditions, not necessarily health provision. So something really in that regard. But let me just come to kind of close and just give some kind of final thoughts on this. So we're at the stage probably now where the measurement of well-being beyond GDP is in place across most governments. Most recognise that you have to take a kind of system-wide perspective. You've got to look at the interdependencies, interactions. The budgets are really important to drive change. So how you get to that kind of process, as Amanda says, you've got to can't be top down. It's got to involve communities. In Scotland, we're passing legislation around community wealth building, but it's got to be it's got to reflect that kind of diversity of view. And there's not one part of government that will really sort this. So where you start can be from whatever is really important to you. But I'll just leave you with one quote that I pinched from one of the speakers at the OECD conference recently in Rome on wellbeing, and he said essentially money is the currency of the economy, but time is the currency of well-being, and the quality of that time that we have, I think, is really, really important. But thank you very much, and I will stop speaking now. Thanks, Michael.
Wonderful, and I won't take up too much time, but just your mention there of quality makes me think of another story when we once spoke to some UK Treasury officials, and we were talking to them about growth, and we were talking, but surely, it's not just about the growth, it's about what the growth's for. And they literally said, we don't care about the quality of the growth, we just care about the quantity. And the quality angle is an ongoing conversation. Thank you so much, Gary. I love the fact that what you guys do at WeGo is that cooperation over competition. You bring your different ideas together, you share them, each of the different governments bring them at different policy labs, and potentially we see adoption by different countries through that shared learning. So a wonderful initiative. Right, let's move on, and we're moving on to Eloi Laurent and Aurora Fran-Soleil, who are going to be sharing a little bit more at the policy knowledge level. So over to you two.
Thank you very much, Michael, and hello to everyone. It's a delight to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. So nice to hear from colleagues and listen to their stories and narratives. I'm going to try to share my screen, which is probably the most difficult thing that I will do today. All right, so Michael, can you let me know if you see it?
Yes, we see.
Okay, all right, great. Thank you so much. So, again, really wonderful to be here. What we are going to present with Aurore Fran-Soleil is the very first draft of a report that we have been writing for a very big project, which is the GANCD. And under the leadership of Dora, you should really know that this project, I think for the first time, includes a full work package on the well-being economy. And I think this intersection between well-being economy and health, for me, was always clear, but I think it's really now really becoming clearer and really gaining momentum, that health should be a key part of well-being economy, and that well-being economy should really be included in all health reflections and policies. And this is very important because I am, as an economist, I want to share a firm belief, which is that for me in the 21st century, basically health is going to take over growth as the main focus, actually, of policies. And I think it has been clear with COVID that we have seen this sort of trade-off between health and growth is going to become even clearer. So what we try to do in this report is really to move from this concept of well-being economy into a clear conceptual framework, a clear definition, and then actionable domains of public policy in the European Union to try to build a tool which ultimately will be a toolbox online where we are going to showcase all the well-being economic policy in the European Union. So first, what we try to do in the report is really to try to clarify the conceptual foundations of the well-being economy. That is, to make sure that we really understand what the well-being economy is about, then clarify the conceptual framework, and then move from this conceptual clarification to making the well-being economy more operational, which is absolutely critical to make key advances in this process. So in this figure, you can see one thing which is a first foundation, which is that the well-being economy is really part of a larger movement, which is now being called post-growth. And post-growth is a much more ambitious agenda than just beyond GDP. Beyond GDP, it was a conference in 2007 organized by the European Commission. Post-growth was really showcased in a conference last year in May 2023 at the European Parliament, where you had thousands of people coming together to really, bring to light the work that has been done among different post-growth streams, degrowth, the donut, the well-being economy. And I think that they are really working together. They are really cooperating to create these new, robust, viable economic alternatives. So the first thing we do is really put the well-being economy back into this larger post-growth picture. Aurore, to you.
Yes. So then, based on a review of existing conceptual framework of the well-being economy that fits within the post-growth paradigm, we have defined 4 main identifying characteristics of the well-being economy. So the first characteristic is a deprioritization of economic growth objective and GDP in favor of human and ecological well-being. Then the second dimension concerns the conception of well-being, which is here involves a holistic conception of well-being that considers human flourishing within planetary limit, which is here referred to as sufficient human well-being. Also, it entails a multidimensional conception of well-being that incorporates a range of human needs and capabilities that includes notably cooperation and health. Then the third dimension concerns the underlying justice principle. And here the well-being economy is actually sustained by justice principle that recognize the embeddedness and interdependence of social and ecological systems, and that integrate justice for nature with justice between different humans today and in the longer term, which is sometimes referred to as social ecological justice. And finally, the fourth dimension is a recognition of the importance of deliberation and contextualization in the construction and operation of this new economy, and an emphasis on participatory democracy, which is really a specificity of well-being economy in the post-growth spring. Then, based on those different characteristics, we have attempted to build a definition and a conceptual framework that Edouard will introduce to you.
So our definition is the following. The well-being economy is a post-growth economy that generates sufficient human well-being by fostering health and cooperation. Here, we have put the sources of inspiration for each of the key terms that we are using in the definition. And I think this definition is rather brief. It's rather clear in terms of the conceptual grounding of the well-being economy as we understand it from the review of all the literature, because there is now a huge literature on the well-being economy that we really undertake in the report. And I think that with that, you can capture actually a lot. For instance, if you look at the presentation by Amanda, it's very clear that a lot of the principles that she was highlighting for the well-being economy are actually captured by those different terms. And so with that, what we do next is we create framework where we break down those 3 core components of sufficiency, health, and cooperation into 6 dimensions of the well-being economy under this general idea of the sufficient well-being. So we start with health, so individual health, obviously collective health, planetary health. With that, of course, we capture all the ecological dimension, the social dimensions, the social determinants of health, etc., the question of social justice, the question of social relations that Amanda also alluded to. And then we have this cooperation dimension, which is social dimension, so it's here, social justice, and then even democracy. And democracy is actually a key question. It's not, I think we need to think about the well-being economy also as an economy connected with democracy, because now it's very clear that democracy is under threat and that we should promote an economy that also is connected to democracy. So then what we do next is we try to connect actionable domains, 18 of them, to those 6 dimensions of the well-being economy. And so we try to really, again, make this come to life, if you will, the conceptual framework. So to start with a clear grounding, then a definition, then a framework, and then actionable policy domains. And the reason why we do that is because we want to build a toolbox which is inspiring and which allows the dissemination of best practices when it comes to the well-being economy as we attempt to define it. Aurore?
Yes, we then look at the well-being economy policy, and to do so, we have chosen to adopt a policy instrument perspective. So with that aim in mind, we have mobilized a typology of policy instrument that considers 6 types of policy instruments. So basically, it is an extended version of the seminal typology proposed by Velug. So it considers the regulatory instrument, the infrastructure and service, the economic instrument, the voluntary ones, the informational instrument, and the procedural instrument. So next. So based on those 6 types of policy instruments and on the 18 well-being economy domain that Ilwa introduced before, we have developed the following framework for operationalizing the well-being economy in Europe. So the idea with this matrix is to inventory, classify, and design well-being economy policy in the European multi-level governance framework. So for each policy that are integrated in the matrix, we highlight 2 main aspects. The first one is the well-being economy dimension to which they are intended to contribute. So to do so, we take the 6 dimensions that were presented before by Ilwa, and we indicate a blue icon. And then the second aspect is the level of governance in which they are implemented, because we thought it was important to reflect the multi-level governance framework of the European Union. And here we consider 3 levels of governance, which are the European, national, and subnational. So I will conclude the presentation by presenting three examples of well-being economy policy, starting with a regulatory instrument whose main objective is contribute to good working condition, which is the right to disconnect. So this well-being economy policy is basically intended to improve social relation by improving work-life balance, but also individual health. And as indicated with the flag icon, it is observed at the national level and notably in France. Then the second example is an economic instrument whose objective is to mitigate climate change, which is the bicycle purchase bonus. So as indicated with the blue icon, this policy is intended to improve planetary health, but also individual health. And it has been observed, as indicated with the icon in black, at the subnational level, and notably in the Walloon region in Belgium, and also at the national level, again in France. And last but not least, we have a procedural instrument, which objective is to improve the quality of public institution, which is, of course, the well-known well-being budget. So this policy instrument is intended to contribute to all the 6 dimensions of the well-being economy. And it has been for now observed at the national level, notably in Iceland. So all of that lead me to the conclusion, which is the next slide. So in this research, we have attempted to clarify the conceptual framework of the well-being economy, drawing on existing literature and the first livable that have been produced in this project. We have also initiated the operationalization of this framework by building the first version of the European Wellbeing Economy Toolbox that I have just introduced to you. So now, for us in the coming months, we are going to develop and disseminate this toolbox by first creating an interactive online tool, which is the toolbox per se, but also by creating workshops for stakeholders to engage with this toolbox, which is what we call the toolkits. So here is a very quick overview of what we've done so far in the project. So we thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Elwa and Aurore. It just strikes me, looking at all of the mechanisms, the policies, the regulations, the suggestions. I think 30 years ago when I first had my university training in economics, why was I never taught about any of these types of things when considering economics? It was almost the opposite of the plurality, the interdisciplinary way that we think about economics now, here with these presentations, compared to the very, very narrow singular pathway that we were taught. So just wonderful. Thank you very much for that. But I don't want to take any more time because we have one final speaker and I don't want to take any more of her time. So Dora, Director of Public Health, Directorate of Health in Iceland, you have the final slot. So over to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all of the speakers. I'm so glad for your contribution, and maybe it's very clear now why well-being economy is so important for health. But I wanted to make this case why it is, and how tell you a little bit about my story, my background, how I went from leaning into the well-being economy, and why I think it's so important for public health. So I've been working in public health for over 2 decades, and I've been involved with most of the public health policies here in Iceland. And it's important, of course, to realize where is health created? Health is not created within the health system. It's created and lived by people within the settings of their everyday life, where they learn, work, play, and love. And health promotion, it comes from the Ottawa Charter, 1986, actually aims to positively affect the determinants of health and well-being. And health promotion is a process that enables and empowers people to influence and improve their own health. So making the healthy choice the easy and accessible choice, irrespective of age, gender, and socioeconomic status. So in order to promote health, it's important to realize what are the determinants of health. And when we look at the rainbow, our version of the Dahlgren's rainbow of the determinants of health, we see that the determinants of health, they lie throughout the society, through sectors. It's the government, it's the local government, it's the workplaces, it's our connections that have an impact on our lifestyle, our choices, which then leads to, our health. And so I need to make this argument. Why is well-being economy important to reduce cancer and other NCDs and to promote health? And my experience from working, as I say, in the public health policy, the first public health policy that I worked on was in 2008, and we made an action plan, actions to promote health on all of those levels, the rainbow. And when I brought it to the Minister of Health, he said, we found out that 75% of the actions were outside the Ministry of Health. Because I can't make an action plan that is outside. So we needed to broaden it up. And the next public health policy that we made in 2016 was made by the Prime Minister's office. But still, I can tell you that the Minister of Health at that point got a little bit offended. Health is my subject. So we're still in those sectors. And I realized that health is a little bit owned by the health sector and the Minister of Health. But when we started to talk about well-being, and health is defined as the physical, mental, and social well-being, well-being is not owned by any one sector, not any one minister. So that changed the whole approach to the work. So well-being was suddenly something that all ministers could relate to, which is a little bit different from the approach that health in all policy, we need all ministers to be health ministers and think about health. That somehow, we tried it, didn't work. But when we found this like common term, which is well-being, which I hope that all politicians agree that they are in politics to increase well-being, both for the people and the planet, then finally we found this common ground and this approach. So well-being economy came as like a gift, an economy that is designed with the purpose of serving the well-being of people and the planet first and foremost. In doing so, it delivers social justice on a healthy planet. And it's both prosperous and distributes wealth equitably, creates health. So, well-being economy creates health and well-being while protecting the planet's resources for future generations and other species. It is designed to be equitable, restorative, and regenerative. So it just became so clear. And I think we are making this argument stronger and stronger that well-being economy is like really important for promoting health. I first learned about well-being economy, I think in this report from the New Economy Foundation, a well-being manifesto for flourishing society from 2003, Economics as if people and the planet matter. And they highlighted what can governments do to increase well-being. It's measuring what matters, create a well-being economy, reclaim more time, create education system that promotes flourishing, refocus the health system, promote complete health. We all agree that our health system is much more focused on diseases than promoting health. And we know that we would save a lot of money if money was the end goal, but most importantly, we would increase well-being if the health system would use more of its resources to promote health. And this image I do use a lot, which you saw with Amanda as well. It's from this paper in Nature, leaving DGP behind or something that came out, I think, in 2014. But I often have it with this quote from Joseph Stiglitz: if you don't measure the right thing, you don't do the right thing. And this image says so much more. And I just want to, we all know the speech, I think, by Bobby Kennedy, where he highlights what GDP captures, that this speech from 1968, he mentions that it increases with a lot of things that are bad for the society. And if we just look at it, increases with its sale of antidepressant medication, its divorce, its prison build, air pollution, tobacco and alcohol sales and advertising. These are all risk factors for cancer and NCDs. So it's not just that it doesn't have a positive impact on our society, it's actually a risk for our health and well-being. And then he says, it does not get the health of our children, the quality of their education or joy of their play. It does not get the beauty of our poetry or the strength of our marriages. It measures everything in short except that which makes life worthwhile. And even, as I mentioned, does rise and increase with things that risk our health. So just finishing why we need well-being economy for better health. The health sectors needs to appreciate the political economy and the value of all policies for health and equity. Siloed and inward-looking health sectors and leaders will be unable to rise to these challenges. They will continue to focus narrowly on financing care while people delay using health services because of off-pocket transport expenses. Food systems are obesogenic, environmental cancer increase, and antibiotic and fungal resistant growth. This is from a paper from the Health Promotional Journal of Australia. How can health and all policy approaches support the transition to well-being economy? So I think it's one of the things that we are discussing in our work in the joint action. And the Well-Being Economy Forum have been mentioned. It's one of the tasks in this joint action is to bring people together, academics, politicians, policymakers, and the business life and NGOs. And we have these great collaborators. We have the Wellbeing Economy governments. We do have Wellbeing Economy Alliance. We do have WHO, UNESCO, OECD, and more and more. And the newest that I just found out this morning, we haven't even put it on our website, is that the president of Iceland, Halla Tómasdóttir, who has been a great ambassador for Wellbeing Economy, she has accepted to be the patron of the Wellbeing Economy forums. So I just hope to see you there. This is a forum for discussion where we discuss how can we do this and how can we take this forward. What have been sharing the information like Ilwa and his colleagues have been showing us here today and finding out what is needed. And one of the things that came up the last forum is we need also to train people in universities through silos. So we are now aiming at developing a master program in well-being sciences. So please, I hope you will get the QR code and see our website, wellbeingeconomyforum.com. And the last thing I want to mention is to save the date for the next webinar that's coming. It's a webinar on sustainability approach by the Joint Action on Prevent NCD. Thank you so much. Over to you, Michael. I think we have few minutes left before we end this. Thank you so much for being with us, and I'll see you in May here in Iceland.
Well, thank you, Dora. And I'm not going to look to just fill the time for filling the time's sake. We can, I'm sure, give you a minute back of the hour that you've given to us. But thank you to all of the presenters. Thank you, Dora, for mentioning my old organization, the New Economics Foundation. Always lovely to get a bit of free advertising for them. I was really pleased that you articulated in your presentation how the framing has been so useful for finding common ground. Because going back to the very first words that I said, togetherness over agreement, it really doesn't matter if one framework and pathway is called this and another is that, and yet they all aim to end at the same destination. That's the point. And just also the point about really, surely the purpose of the economy is to make doing the right thing for your own health, the health of others, and the health of the planet the obvious thing. And so today we've heard presentations about some of the very practical ways that we can try and re-engineer and redesign the economy to be able to do that. So thank you to all of the presenters. Thank you to all of those who have joined us online. And I understand that this is being recorded and will be available on a YouTube channel. So look out for further communications and have a good rest of your day wherever you are. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.